Welcome to Volume 16 of Scary Stories to Relax To. Tonight we have stories involving a twisted town, state parks, and many other stories involving the strange and bizarre. Of course, with this being a part of the Relax To series, all of the stories will be coupled with rain ambience. If you'd like to have a story featured, you can submit it to my subreddit r/slumberreads. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy, as it helps out the channel immensely. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Stay safe out there, enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Two nights ago I went missing. I had one drink too many, and before I knew it, I was seeing double. I asked for another drink, and the bartender refused. In drunk fury, I cursed and screamed, only to get kicked out moments later. I did the only logical thing my drunk mind could think of. I got in my car and started to drive home. The night was dark, and the road was slick because of the light rain falling. The soothing sound of rain relaxed my intoxicated body. It relaxed me maybe a little too much because, before I knew it, I had taken an unmarked exit, and I was in the middle of nowhere. The slick roads combined with my fatigue sent me careening off the road and into a road sign which I plowed over. In my barely conscious state, the last thing I remember was a heavy darkness engulfing my car. It was pitch black. Not even my headlights could pierce the intense darkness I was caught in. Then there was nothing. I was awakened by faint laughter. It must have been a dream, thought to myself. Then I realized I wasn't in my bed. I awoke in a 2-story house. Everything was so vibrant and bright in comparison to my dull and bleak apartment. I sat up and looked to my left. The nightstand had a fake plant on it. The owners of this place are smart. I'll never have to water this, I whispered to myself with a laugh. I better get up and thank them, I thought. I looked out the window and realized I was in what I envisioned to be a perfect neighborhood. Every house had the same baby blue paint, the same flower beds in their front lawns, the same overly vibrant green grass, the same everything. I went to the bathroom to freshen up a little before I made my way downstairs. I was about to wash my face when I turned the handle on the sink. No water. I tried opening the cabinet below the sink, only to discover that the cabinetry was glued to the facing. I rushed downstairs and came to the realization that nobody was home. All the cabinets in the kitchen were glued just as in the bathroom. What the hell? I said aloud. I realized I was starving. I opened the refrigerator to find something to eat. I grabbed an apple and took a bite. The satisfying crunch echoed in my ears and I began to chew. Seconds later, I realized I was chewing on styrofoam. I began to fiercely spit the little pieces of prop apple out of my mouth. Aggravated, I marched over to their landline phone. I dialed in my friend Jason's phone number, but the phone had no connection. I came to the horrifying realization that everything in the house was props. Furniture was glued to the floor, the tablecloth was somehow stuck to the table, and the utensils and plates were glued to their surfaces as well. In the midst of my confusion, I heard laughter. Laughter from outside like some sick being was taunting me. In my furious state, I bursted through the front door. I don't know what... I began shouting but was cut off by pure shock. The place was deserted. Cars were placed in the middle of the street to signify as if they were being driven. I looked to my right and noticed something in a tree. A squirrel? Yes, a squirrel. In excitement, I rushed over. I stepped onto the lawn, and just when I was about to reach the cute rodent, it fell limp onto the ground. It was merely just a stuffed animal. I fell to my knees, and to my surprise the impact when I hit the lawn hurt. I went down to feel the surface and noticed the lawn wasn't grass at all. It was paper mache. I went to the tree where the squirrel had fallen, and also found that the tree was just a plastic prop. I sprinted to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door. I twisted the knob, and for the life of me, I couldn't make it budge. Usually when you twist the handle of a locked door, the handle will slightly twist, but because of the lock's resistance, it won't allow you to open the door. This time, the handle wasn't turning in the slightest. I had knocked on at least 12 other houses just to make the horrible discovery that I was seriously the only one in this damn town. I began to get desperate. That's when I saw the silhouette of a woman in the top floor of the next house's window. I knocked on their door, and when nobody came, I began to furiously bang on the door. Just as I began shouting profanities, the door swung open to reveal an identical house to the one I woke up in. Nobody greeted me. The door just swung open. I rushed up the stairs saying, "Thank goodness, ma'am. It's been a real nightmare. I thought I was the only one here, and when I saw you, I just had to..." I reached to grab the woman's shoulder, but something didn't feel right. Fear and horrifying realization consumed me. I whipped the woman around, and her head popped right off her shoulders and rolled to my feet to reveal her faceless face. She was merely just a mannequin. I looked down at the head that popped off. I broke down. You can choose to believe me or not, but while I was sobbing, the mannequin, still headless, placed its hand on my shoulder. Through blurry tears, I retracted back and kicked at the being as it began walking towards me. Its stiff motion was animatronic-like. I got to my feet and sprinted down the stairs, falling at the last set. I slammed the door behind me, and when I walked out, the town was now populated with robot-like mannequins. In my grief, I could hear a sound. It was a train whistle of an old steam locomotive. I hopped to my feet and pushed my way through robotic mannequins toward the sound. The sound of the locomotive was blaring, signaling I was close. My escape from this hellish nightmare was in sight. I rushed to the car's door, and they swung open as I approached. I leaped into a seat and exhaled a sigh of relief. On my way out, I finally learned the name of this cursed town. I was making my way into a tunnel when, through the window, I read a sign saying, "Leaving Parkersville." I exhaled a long drawn-out breath, and before I knew it, I had dozed off. At an unknown hour, I was awakened to the sound of the locomotive's whistle. It was night now. The train had come to a stop. I exited the train, and there I was in the station. I was happily walking through the station when my happiness turned to dread. In my peripherals, I noticed a sign at the exit. "Welcome to Parkersville." I haven't had food in days. If you know how to leave this place, please help me. I hear voices from the outside. The train just takes you in a circle. I haven't left the train car because it's the only safe place from the mannequins. If you see this, please send help. My friends and I made a mistake. I steal from people. Now I know that sounds bad, but hear me out before you judge me. I work a minimum wage job with a boss who's got an ego bigger than a blimp, and customers who either take nothing better to do than complain, or have nothing but a few rocks in their heads. I live in a small, dirty apartment, with no one but my fish for company. That's not to say I'm lonely. I visit my grandma every week. She's actually part of the reason I steal. My grandma is a very sweet woman, but she relies on retirement checks to pay her bills and doesn't have a lot of money for much else, so I offer to buy her groceries. At first it wasn't much of an issue, but one day I got fired from my decently paying job and had to get another job at a retail store. I struggled along for a while, until my buddy, Mike, made a suggestion. Let's rob people. Now at first I was completely opposed to the idea, but then Mike explained he didn't mean breaking into places with weapons and all that, just finding out when people weren't going to be home, then sneaking in and taking some things they wouldn't notice. Jewelry that had been worn once and forgotten about, souvenirs bought without much thought on vacations, DVDs that had been collecting dust, that sort of thing. And it surprisingly worked out. Mike knew how to pick locks, and somehow always knew when people would be gone for at least a day or two. And I had good night vision, and I can disable some of the cheaper alarm systems. Thanks to some help from online tutorials, things were going pretty well. I was able to pay my bills and help out my grandma, and no one got hurt. Then Mike got ambitious. There's a man in our town who most people avoid. He's pretty intimidating. He's well over 6 feet tall and is heavily muscled. He's got an intense look in his eyes, like he's sizing up everyone he looks at and thinking about the easiest way to kill them. And he's most likely rich. He's got a huge house on the edge of town, and he drives a pretty nice car. He's even got a good ring on each hand. One day Mike caught word that apparently people see his car leave his house and not return for at least 2 or 3 days. As soon as Mike heard this, he started scheming up a plan. He wanted to bust in as soon as night fell and take whatever we could. I was opposed at first. The guy probably had some state-of-the-art security system, camera alarms, the whole 9 yards. But Mike was insistent. He said that if we could pull this off, then that would be it. No more stealing. And as much as that sounds like a line from a bad heist movie, I couldn't resist. I hated stealing from people, even if it was only a little at a time, so we made a plan. We'd wait till close to midnight and sneak in through the woods at the back of his property. I saw Mike brought his gun, and when I asked about it, he said he was just bringing it if we got caught. I didn't like it, but it was too late to say anything. As we crept across the lawn, I wrapped my hand around the necklace my grandma gave me. It wasn't anything fancy, just a silver pendant shaped like a star. I always felt better wearing it. We made it to the door, and Mike got to work picking the lock. I peeked through the window, checking to see if there were any pets that would start going crazy when we snuck in. It was dark and hard to see, but I didn't spot anything yet. I also checked for signs of a security system, but oddly, I found none. Mike got the door open, and we stepped in to find we were standing in the middle of a huge kitchen. It was nothing fancy. A large stove, sink, a refrigerator, and one of those huge freezers that I've always thought looks like a coffin. Mike and I began looking around to find anything of value that wouldn't be missed, as I was searching drawers in the hope of finding some expensive silverware. Oddly enough, it all looked like cheap stuff you'd get at a supermarket. I heard Mike gasp behind me. I whipped around expecting the worst, but instead, found him staring into the freezer. He turned to me and gestured me over. I walked over and looked inside. It was packed with meat. I figured he probably had a farm's worth of meat in there. I didn't think much of it. I guess the guy just really liked meat. We quietly shut the freezer and made our way to the living room. This room was a bit more promising. There were various old knickknacks and items he likely wouldn't notice missing. I slipped a fancy-looking gold paperweight into my pocket. It was likely not real gold, but maybe I'd get lucky. We began stuffing things into our sacks as quietly as we could. The house was far enough away from most of the others, so we weren't too worried about being heard. But we always had a strict rule about being safe. The last thing we wanted was some guy in a midnight jog calling the cops. We cleared out the living room and made our way up to the stairs. The stairs likely led to the bedrooms and attic. The attic was always the best place to look. But then we noticed the basement door. We figured that we might as well clear out the basement, then work our way up. We tried to open the door, but were stopped by a large iron padlock. That unnerved me a bit. Why put such a heavy lock on the basement door? But it only seemed to encourage Mike. He made quick work of it, and the door swung silently open to reveal stairs, descending into darkness. I was a bit nervous, but Mike led the charge, creeping into the shadows that swallowed him up like a thick mist. I followed soon after and noticed that the stairs under my feet felt like they were made of stone. I was grateful for that. Stone stairs don't squeak. Soon we came to another scene that unnerved me, a gate at the end of the stairs. This caught both me and Mike off guard. Why would you put a gate in the basement? By this point, Mike had flipped on a small flashlight. There wasn't much chance someone would notice the lights all the way down here. We inspected the gate for a bit. It seemed to be polished silver. Mike just shrugged and said was likely because the house was old. When I looked at him odd, he shrugged again and told me that people used to be superstitious. Maybe whoever lived here thought that having this gate down here protected them. I just nodded my head. Mike had already started working the lock, and I was trying to see what was beyond the gate. It was dark, so I couldn't make out much. I saw a shape, though, large and unmoving. I assumed it was an old wardrobe or something. The gate slowly swung open with a creak, and I could have sworn I heard another noise, something like a deep growl. I froze and looked at Mike. He looked back. Both of us were unsure of what to do. Mike whispered that it was probably just the pipes. I nodded slowly, but wasn't convinced. I wanted to turn and leave. Some primal part of my brain was screaming for me to leave, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot. Slowly, Mike took a step inside. I blinked a few times as he slowly made it into the basement and chided myself. I'm not a kid anymore. It's just an old basement. Then I noticed something was off. For a moment, I didn't know what, but then it hit me. The shape that I thought was a dresser was gone. I squinted into the dark, trying to see if maybe I just forgot where it was, when I heard something that froze my blood. It was the growl again, an unmistakable growl from a few feet away. I turned to Mike to say something, but before I could, he suddenly tensed. I was confused for a moment, then saw why. There were 4 massive stark white claws dripping with blood, all forcing their way from Mike's chest. He dropped the flashlight, and it tumbled across the ground to me and illuminated the horror behind him. A massive creature, its body covered in thick black fur. Blood-red eyes flared at me from the darkness, and it snarled, revealing rows of sharp yellow teeth. He let out a howl and threw Mike aside, his limp body crumpling to the floor like a rag doll. I turned and tried to run, but the beast was faster. In one leap, it tackled me to the ground. I turned mid-fall and landed on my back with that thing looming over me. Fear gripped my heart as it opened its jaws to tear my head from my shoulders. In sheer panic, I beat at the creature with my bare hands. It didn't even seem to notice, as its jaws closed in on my head, and I had one last desperate idea. I grabbed the star pendant from my necklace and tore it off. With all the strength I could muster, I stabbed the point of the star into the creature's eye. It let out a thundering roar of what I assumed to be agony and thrashed. As it did, I felt its jaws clasp around my wrist. Blinding pain tore up my arm, and I nearly passed out. The creature let me go and clawed the pendant from its eye. As I faded from consciousness, the last thing I saw was the beast bounding through the gate and out of the basement. I awoke later. The smell of blood was the first thing to greet me as I slowly opened my eyes. The second thing to greet me was throbbing pain in my arm. I inspected the wound. The bleeding had stopped, and I didn't think the bone was broken. I slowly staggered to my feet. I looked around and saw Mike's corpse and shuddered. There was nothing I could do for him, so I slowly made my way up the basement stairs. The door to the basement was shattered, and the living room was decimated. The furniture was smashed to splinters, and claw marks covered the hardwood floor. The back door was smashed as much as the basement, and I saw that. I must not have been out long, as it was still dark out. I looked around and saw a clock on the wall. It was a few hours until dawn. Not knowing what else to do, I made my way home. I cleaned my arm wound and flopped onto my bed. Even as I write this now, my whole body is burning up. I feel like I have some kind of fever. I don't want to go to a doctor. I'm scared to even leave my house. If someone discovers what happened, or if they find Mike's body, how am I supposed to explain myself? I'm writing this now so people know what happened, and I'm also writing it as a warning. Never, ever rob houses under the full moon. Growing up, I lived in the middle of the woods. No neighbors for about a mile on each side, and we owned 60 acres of forest, then a swamp after that. So basically, I live in the middle of nowhere. One summer, when I was about 14, I was out in the middle of the woods playing with my dog. I'm an only child, and both my parents were out of town, when I kept feeling something hit my elbow. I'd go to throw Max's ball, and the bump would make me throw it almost straight up. Assuming it was just me bumping into trees or something, I ignored it. After the fourth or fifth time of it happening, I thought, well, this sucks. I'll just go home. Walking back, I felt uneasy, but I knew I was just freaking myself out because we were alone. About an hour later, Max and I are at home, and on the couch when the garage door opens, and he starts barking. I hop up to go let in my mom and dad. Even though they were home really early, I peered through the peephole and saw the door was still shut and no one was in the garage. Quieting Max down, I opened the door slowly and called out for my dad. Nothing. No response at all, so I go out to check the door, and it's still locked. Okay, sure. Weird, but oh well. Max heard it too, so at least I know I'm not crazy. About 20 minutes later, I hear the door open again, and this time Max starts growling like crazy. I quiet him down again, and just assume it's the wind or something making noises, even though by this point my heart is racing. I hear footsteps come up the stairs and think, oh geez, Dad really is home this time. And hop up and run to the door. It starts to jiggle, so I run faster to let him in. I peep through the hole, and even though my hand is loosely around the jiggling handle, there's no one on the other side of the door. Terrified, I go hide on the couch with all the lights on. Max is still growling. About an hour after that, I start to feel a little bit better, even though I'm still terrified when I hear the door handle jiggle again. This time it was Max jiggling it. He needed to go outside, and the only way outside is through the garage. Fantastic. I literally sprint with him to the kennel. As I'm standing in there, I decide to ask this thing questions to make myself feel better, because I knew it wouldn't answer me. Thinking about what to ask it, my eyes are drawn to the huge heavy oak door on the kennel. It was always open because it was too heavy for me to move easily. I said, "Okay, ghost. If you're real, you'll shut this heavy door." Nothing. A minute goes by. Nothing. Max is still sniffing around. I turn around to yell at him to hurry up, and then from behind me I hear click. I whipped around and saw the giant door had swung shut and latched. Okay, clearly it was just the wind. If you're really real, you'll open the massive door back up. Nothing. I relax a bit, and then squat down with my head on my knees, reminiscing about how lame I was just being scared when I heard click clack. The door was now wide open. Max was done, so we booked it back into the house, locking every door in the house. For the next 4 hours I would hear the footsteps on the stairs, and the door handle jiggling every few minutes, until finally around 11 p.m., my dad walks in and yells at me for wasting electricity. I never told him or my mom about it until about 4 months later, when my dad came in from hunting after dark. He looked shaken, and I asked him what was wrong. He said he aimed at 2 deer, but missed both completely because it felt as if something was hitting his elbow and making him shoot way above the deer. That's when I told him everything. My love for the strange and unusual has always been never-ending and overbearing. I always sought out more answers than were currently available. The constant hunger for information was insatiable, as was the need to share my imagination of horror unnerving. Sometimes even scare myself with my constant thoughts and imaginations. But now I'll share them with the world, hoping that maybe you'll stop sleeping too. Hope you enjoy. It's been another one of those long nights. One of those nights where you're up late, parents are asleep, and you're tumbling down a rabbit hole of Wikipedia pages and YouTube pages. You went from a quick video of a favorite band to suddenly a video about putting salt on snails. None of us want to admit it, but we fall down this hole regularly. Life of a 16-year-old. However, tonight was different. I was scouring over some message boards on the deep web. I know it's a dangerous thing to do. You never know what you're going to find, but who knows? It might be some good stuff. I started reading down this thread of news. Mainly news the media won't cover, because it's nothing to base a story on and get people promoted. Anyways, I found one that piqued my interest. It was a thread with a few replies. Nothing too interesting. But the title got me. It was The Smile Phenomena. Alright, interesting enough. I was roped in. I clicked on it and was reading through, and it was basically just a bunch of hogwash talking about this theory. In some police archives, someone obviously pulled from police data storages. The posting, in short, was describing murders that occurred with a common trend. Yeah, the murders are basically the same shit over and over again, usually over something ridiculous, but these were different. Apparently the individual who committed the acts were found to be dead themselves, apparent suicide. But no signs of self-harm are ever able to be found, just sudden cardiac arrest. But the strangest thing of all was that the killers were always found with the same broken smile on their faces. And I mean broken in the sense that their smile is almost something out of a cartoon. A smile ear to ear, not comical either. The smiles are described as a forced grin and pushed to the point beyond human capabilities to smile. Later autopsies reported that the individual cheekbones were snapped and allowed the smiles to stretch even further, revealing all of their teeth. And worst thing, their eyes didn't squint. It was just their wide-eyed smile, big eyes, bright teeth, and the blood from their mouth pouring down from the broken face muscles and bones to force that smile. Enough about the description, because that's just the beginning. Apparently these smiling individuals were the cause for brutality and savagely murdering individuals. And in the case of a family of 4, for example, only one of the family members would be found deceased along with the smiling killer. The rest of the family was spared, though every individual questioned after the fact could not remember the encounter, let alone the last 24 hours leading up to the killing. The stories and police reports always end the same way, in some shape or another though. However, the weirdest thing of all was, at the end of the original poster's thread, was a bit of a warning. I don't know how I'm supposed to take it, but it reads as follows. Irregardless if you believe these stories, never refer to the smile in conversation with an individual. For some reason, reading the words or reading into the phenomena will not have an effect. Please be careful. What in the absolute hell am I supposed to do with that little bit of information? Well, I'd had enough for one night. I turned off the computer and called it a night. Couldn't sleep, however. The pictures of the crime scenes flowed through my head. The mutilated bodies, the blood, and worst of it all, that smile. It was so unnerving, that emotionless, forced smile, and the fact it was so wide. The lifeless bodies on the ground after death, with a smile with the dry blood on the teeth. I couldn't get it out of my head. I tossed and turned for what seemed like hours until the sweet release of sleep gave in. School seemed like it was moving in slow motion. I couldn't concentrate. The teachers' voices sounded like Charlie Brown adults. The sounds of a deflated trombone. I just couldn't get these thoughts out of my head. I decided that when I got home from school, I'd do some more research into this. I got home from school. Dad was at work like always, and Mom was already starting dinner. Pork chops tonight from the smell. We talked about our days, and I asked if she needed help with dinner. She politely declined my offer and told me to jump at homework instead. Me and Mom always had a better relationship than me and my dad. He's always wanted me to grow into the manly man's field of work in the machine industry like himself and his dad. Me? I wanted to go into computers and video games. He keeps telling me I'm young. I tell him I've already decided. In any case, he looks at me like I'm a lost cause. He normally gets drunk at night and loudly tells my mom they should try again at another one. I scoff it off as whatever. Anyways, I ran upstairs as my mom continued cooking. I tossed my school bag to the side of the bed and started up the computer. Felt like hours, digging into threads, stories, watching videos. But in the end, they all ran dry, and no matter how far I dug, I never found much else. That first thread I found was the only thread that ever really mentioned anything. I figured I'd try and look at the thread again and read if anyone else had posted anything. But to my surprise, or displeasure in this case, it was gone. Not just the post, but the forum. Everything. I went through my history too to see if maybe my computer saved anything in offline mode. And nothing. It's as if it never existed. I didn't really know what to think. I looked at the clock and suddenly realized it was 1 in the morning. Did my mom finish dinner? Did I ever go to the bathroom? No, I don't remember anything. I just had this burning picture of the smile in the back of my head. A headache was starting. Took some Advil, killed the computer, and called it a night. The next couple of days I felt like I was on autopilot. I didn't know what to really think. I was distracted with these ideas, these dreams of smiling people around me. It felt like my sanity was starting to slip. I found myself brushing my teeth in the mornings and looking up at the mirror, and I could swear my face wasn't my own. I didn't even get scared. I laughed, I smiled, but it always looked bigger in the mirror. I paid no attention to this, even after it started reaching my ears on some days. It's been a week, and I woke up after tossing and turning all night again. My bed was soaked from the sweat. I zombie walked to the bathroom, and eventually downstairs. My mother's face as I descended down the stairs to the table on the bright Saturday morning was that of dismay. She noticed I'd been avoiding everyone the last week, but I've been so absorbed into my own thoughts that I suppose I forgot I even had a family. I slumped into the chair as my mom served me a plate of eggs and bacon and toast. I had my head rested into my hands as my mom walked back to the stove to get my dad's plate ready. I became lost in the egg yolk, so shiny and glistening. Barely even heard my mom ask from the kitchen about what's been on my mind. I didn't even notice when my lips started moving as I muttered to her, just thinking about the smile. Suddenly I came back to reality as my eyes became big. I reached to cover my mouth, but my ears turned to the kitchen as my mother dropped a plate to the floor, and the sounds of bones snapping in her face. I felt a tear roll down my face as she turned around, smiling at me. I lost my phone underneath my bed last night. I was supposed to go to the airport for a work flight to a corporate meeting in some offshoot of our company. I wanted a quick cat nap, winding down from a stressful work day. I listened to some relaxing music, Orchestral music of Dmitri Shostakovich danced through my ears in a waltz. Maybe it was the tired stupor I was put in, but just as I was going to plug in my phone and call it a night, I dropped it. The way my bed is set up, two sides touch a wall, and I sleep with the headboard against the corner. There's an outlet in the corner, and I usually let my phone rest in the nook between my mattress and the wood frame as I sleep. Of course, I needed my phone fully charged for the next day. My phone was older, it drained pretty quickly, and I needed it well charged for company business. So I looked at the thin crack between my bed and the wall. It couldn't have gone far, right? Much to my chagrin, my phone was nowhere in sight. Though it was dark, I hadn't thought to turn the lights on to search. I couldn't see anything but muddy shadows and dust bunnies hiding on the wooden floor. I could still hear my music though, so I knew it hadn't been sucked into some portal. Classical, as it turned out, was a good enough backdrop to lull me to sleep every night, and I found myself nodding off within minutes. I woke to silence. Maybe it was the total nothing I heard that woke me up, or maybe the music had died long before I woke up, but I could swear I wasn't asleep for very long. That feeling like it's been nothing more than a blink, but really, you've been asleep for hours. The window was pitch black, darker than when I'd fallen asleep, and since I lived alone, there were no other noises to be spoken about. Crickets, owls, wind could all be heard from the window, but inside the house held nothing but a faint ringing in my ears, a remnant of my slumber. Immediately, I could tell I wouldn't be able to fall asleep again, too alert, too awake, but still in need of a good cup of coffee. I shuffled my way into my kitchen to fix myself a pot. Muscle memory dictated my movements, and without even needing to open my eyes, I was easily able to get the pot started. When I did open my eyes, there wasn't any difference between the void in my head and the shadows outside. In retrospect, maybe the power went out in my area. Maybe there was an electrical surge. Maybe I didn't pay the electric bill, but none of those seemed quite right. The microwave had no glowing numbers to tell me the time. There were no streetlights lit, no cars, not even the little red dot on my coffee maker was lit. Yet, I could hear the swinging of the streetlights from the wind. I could hear the cars moving past my house. I could hear my coffee being brewed. Where was the light? Maybe I was in a dream. I poured myself my coffee and scorched my tongue. No dream. Maybe I had gone blind. I couldn't rule that out at the time. Maybe, just maybe, my bed was a portal to another world that was exactly like my own, but shrouded in darkness. Definitely not. I mused and mused, the sky not giving any indication of time, with no moon hanging in the sky, and no stars peeking through. Minutes, hours, days passed, and I still saw no light. My eyes began to ache, and sparks of light seemed to dance across my eyes as they strained to see in the darkness. Shadows, though everything was a shadow, waltzing along the walls. Dark figures passed by, and I saw faces in the dark that I knew couldn't be real. They grinned at me, taunting me with a flash of something I couldn't even fathom to have myself. Their own light illuminated their faces and twisted their features into grotesque masks. I could recognize a few, but most were foreign to me. The recognizable ones scared me most. Minutes, hours, days. Honestly, I grew bored. There's only so much you can do in the darkness. You can't draw or paint. My computer didn't appear to have any light, and I didn't want to risk going outside in case I got hit by a car that I couldn't see. So I stayed in my house, exploring the way my house felt without light. Despite the ease of navigation to the kitchen, where I visited every day for a cup of coffee, traversing to other parts of the house was not as easy. My guest rooms were just a hallway away from my own, but I rarely visited them when I could see, and the path felt awkward. The bathroom was easy to find, but the basement was harder because of a brief flight of stairs that creaked and groaned under my weight. Minutes, hours, days. I saw a streak of light come from the attic one day. It nearly blinded me, again, when I first saw it, and it rained down the cracks of wood that made up my hallway flooring, blue, white, and cold. It burned my retinas as I gazed upon the rays. When was the last time I have seen light? Minutes, hours, days. I had to close my eyes. Too much light. I breathed in deep and exhaled, again and again. In, out, too bright. It hurt. When I opened my eyes, the light was still there. I was ready for it. I looked at the blue-white and reached towards the handle that would open the hatch to the attic. The frayed rope nearly snapped, but I got the wooden ladder down with ease using the light that I'd been given. I slowly climbed the ladder, rung by rung, wooden step by wooden step. I approached the opening to the attic, and I could hear something. What was it? The light grew brighter and harsher, the noise louder and more jarring than anything I'd heard before. Like a battle crashing through my head, the symphonies of Dmitri Shostakovich deafened me as I made my way into the attic, a pillar of light hailing down upon me. My phone sat atop my dusty suitcase, light glaring at me and music blasting. I grabbed my phone and, after turning down the volume, used the light to look at the staircase. Years of neglect had rendered the leather exterior worn. Tracks of dust from where I'd run my fingers across the front. I opened the suitcase and peered inside. A grotesque hand reached out at me, grasping at the air, and I nearly dropped my phone again as I scrambled to close the suitcase. Bloody fingers pried at the edges of the bag, bloody and writhing as I forced it closed. I slammed the suitcase down, holding it tight, and I squeezed my eyes as tightly as I was closing the bag. When I woke up, the sun poured through my window, and my bed was illuminated from the morning light. I peered down at the crack in between my bed and the wall to find my phone, logged in and wedged between the mattress and the frame my bed was held in. I sighed in relief and unlocked my phone to check up on my emails. The photo album was open. The only picture in the gallery was one of a hand, blood caked under the nails, strained inside of a leather suitcase. Since me and his mom split up, our 9-year-old son has had difficulty sleeping. We had shared custody, where he spent every other week with me. Whenever he was at my house, he would wake up in the middle of the night and come get me. He was never able to explain exactly why he woke up, except that he was afraid and didn't feel safe. Most mornings I would wake up next to him in his bed, not even remembering coming with him. On nights where I wasn't completely passed out though, I would hear the creak in his bed as he rose, followed by quick little steps hastened by the dark, as he rushed down the hall towards my bedroom. Always as he opened my door, he would rub the sleep out of his eyes with the back of one of his hands, while reaching out to me with the other. I would take it, follow him back, and embrace him in the bed, telling him he was safe. This night was no different. I woke up from my light slumber by the usual creak in his bed. I was already up when the little hurried footsteps halted outside my door, so I grabbed his hand as soon as it swung open, and we walked hand in hand back to his bedroom. Somehow, this nightly routine had begun to bring comfort to me as well, like as if it was a sign that all was as it should be. So when we climbed into his bed, and I embraced him as his warm breath hit my chest in waves with light snores telling me he already had fallen back to sleep, I too felt safe. I was moments from drifting off to sleep when a sudden realization shook me to the core. My son was with his mother this week. I slowly, afraid of what I might see, moved my chin down to face the breath warming my chest. Under the long black hair on the head resting in my arms, I saw pale, rotten skin surrounding two wide, awake eyes looking back at me with a twisted, terrible excitement. Beneath the dreadful, intense gaze were gray lips stretched in an unnatural wide grin, barely showing the discolored teeth through which the now rasping breath was flowing. I was unable to move. Frozen with fear as I felt a cold hand climb up my back as I reached out to return the embrace, fingers tapping on my back as if they did the climbing for it. Sharp, ragged nails pierced my skin with every touch. As I reached my neck, I could feel the fingers stretch all the way to wrap around my throat. The sound of them cracking as they grew so impossibly long was deafening. The last thing I remember before passing out was the mouth of this entity opening into a gaping silent laughter, and a sudden tight squeeze on my throat. I woke up screaming in my own bed in the morning, drenched in sweat, terror still trembling in my bones. For a long while, all I could do was stare into my sunlit room, both terrified of the capacity I'd shown for nightmares, and relieved that it was all a dream. One last gasp escaped me. As I got up and faced the wardrobe mirror, I saw tiny specks of blood in the sheets behind me from my clawed back. a dark bruise around my throat, and an unnatural wide grin in the pale face under my bed. To anyone who reads this post, take this as a warning and never trust the noises or things you see in the fog. I live in a town in the Bay Area. For future reference, there is a large forest near the end of the town that most of the kids in my neighborhood like to hang out in. There is an abandoned bunker that we kids decided to turn into a little hangout spot. I should probably clarify that we are all around 14 to 16 and have known each other for basically all our lives. About 4 years ago, we were all inspired by the game franchise Five Nights at Freddy's and decided to buy these security cameras. I forgot the brand, but according to the person who we bought them from, they're the same type of cameras big stores use. When the cameras arrived, we decided to install them around the forest, which required longer cables, which cost us more, but it was so worth it. We were so proud after we put them up and got the cameras working that we made little mini games, from extreme hide and seek and a game we like to call Stealth Op. Stealth Op was basically this game where, depending on how many people are playing, 1 to 3 people start at the entrance to the forest and try to make their way to the bunker without being seen. There were also multiple people outside the bunker patrolling the area. While the patrollers were limited to certain areas of the forest, the people at the start had no limits of where they could go, and the most important job was the security watch. 2 people would be at the bunker, watching the cameras and have walkie-talkies to talk to the patrollers. Now, around 3 months ago, our parents allowed us to go out as long as we took disinfectant procedures once we get home, which means we could all hang out at the bunker like normal. On this day, we decided to play Stealth Op. It was around 5 p.m. on a May Saturday. I was lucky and got the security watch role with my friend Noel. When the game started, a patroller noticed something with the weather and told us that the fog was starting to come in, but with no way to easily communicate with the starting team. We decided to have the patrollers come back to the bunker so we could all regroup. We all figured we could just let the starting team find their way here, since it was practically engraved in our brains by now. The entire patrolling team got back to the bunker and we were just trying to get a hold of the starting team so we could explain the situation. But because their role is to be sneaky, 2 of them left their phones behind in the bunker. Only 1 person had their phone. My friend Marvin. We were looking at the cameras to see if we could find where the starting team was so we could get a good idea of where they were. The first 2 spotted on the cams were Marvin and Brandon. Both Marvin and Brandon looked lost, and because of the placement of the cameras, we knew that they were both in 2 opposite areas of the forest. Next thing we know, we hear a knock on the bunker door and it's our friend Nate telling us to open the hatch. When we open the hatch, Nate promptly enters with a grin on his face, as if saying he won. But it took him a second to realize that everyone who was playing as patroller was there. Then we all immediately snapped back to the cams when Noel told us to look at what he sees. To say we were spooked would be an understatement. We were terrified. We stared at the cams trying to understand what we were looking at. 2 figures on the cams, one headed towards both Marvin and Brandon. We watched in horror as the figure approached Brandon and lifted up what seemed to be an arm and put it on his shoulder. Immediately after, Brandon snapped to look behind himself and then back, and began to run in the direction of the bunker. As we watched the cams, we saw him approaching the bunker, but not only that. The figure was chasing after Brandon. When we saw Brandon on the cams about 20 feet from the bunker, we hastily opened the hatch, and with the last amount of strength he had, Brandon dove into the bunker and we immediately closed the hatch. We noticed the amount of fear in Brandon's eyes as he sat on the couch, and the look on his face. We could only imagine what he saw. For a short moment, we thought that it was all over, but not a second later Noel had screamed at us to look at the cams. We darted our heads to face the cams and watched as the figure headed to Marvin. What's worse is that Marvin had gotten so lost that he started walking in the complete opposite direction of the bunker. And not only that, he was walking towards the figure. We all watched in horror as they both get closer and closer to each other. We all were scrambling to figure out how we would warn him. Words like shit and fuck were echoing throughout the bunker. I noticed that Nate and Brandon's phones were still on the table, and realized Marvin was the only one of the 3 starters who had their phone with them since the start. Without hesitation, I pulled my phone out of my pocket, fumbling with my phone, almost dropping it. Sweat poured from my hands, making it harder to focus on dialing Marvin. My heart raced as I pressed the call button. I watch on the cams as Marvin picks up his phone and answers with a calm and soft, "Hello?" I frantically scream in the phone to turn around and run. Marvin questions why and I scream at him to just do so. At that second, the cams show that the figure caught up with Marvin and was on the same screen as him. On the phone, I hear this ear-piercing screech and Marvin's voice screaming, "Oh shit." We see him on the cams making a mad dash towards the bunker. Noel had opened the hatch and started screaming for Marvin, so he knew where to go. On the phone I could hear Marvin breathing and taking steps. As this happens, we all hear from both the phone and outside a loud screech, and I hear Marvin's breathing get heavier and his footsteps faster. With every step I hear Marvin take on the phone, the screeching gets louder and louder outside. I yell at Marvin to get ready to jump into the bunker. As I say this, Nate and our friend Avina both run over to the bottom of the entrance, getting in a position to catch Marvin. Marvin yells, "I see it," on the phone, and Noel gets ready to shut the hatch. As Nate and Avina get ready to catch Marvin, we all hear a glass-shattering shriek. Without a second thought, Marvin dives into the bunker, crashing into Nate and Avina. Then with no hesitation, Noel shuts the hatch and locks it, then is followed by a large thud on the hatch. My legs go weak from fright and worry, and I proceed to collapse to my knees on the floor. For what felt like an eternity, the only noise that filled the room was the sound of Marvin trying to catch his breath. Noel decided to break the silence and ask Marvin and Brandon what they saw. Marvin said he saw a person and that their mouth opened wider than they can even imagine, and that's when he began running. We looked at Brandon, who looked more shaken than Marvin. Brandon tells us that he remembers looking backward, and when he did, he says he saw this deformed creature. Its chest opened up, and this creature's bones started deforming, cracking as they started to form into what looked like a mouth. He said when he saw that, he began to make a mad dash to the bunker. We all had a moment of silence until our friend Jeremiah asked how we were going to get out of the forest. No one had a definitive answer, but we all agreed we would just sleep in the bunker for the night, at least until the fog was gone and we could see. We told our parents that we couldn't risk getting lost in the forest due to the fog, and they all agreed that we should just sleep in the bunker for the night. Later that night, before people started heading to bed, Marvin added one extra detail he didn't mention in his story. He told us that before I had called him, he heard me telling him to come towards him in the fog. He said it was kind of like me trying to comfort him when he heard me. When morning came, we left the bunker making sure that there was no fog. We wanted to make sure we could see. Before we all left the forest, we all agreed to never talk about that night ever again, which is what we would have done. 2 days ago, Marvin told us in the group chat that before I had called him, he also saw a clearing and this deformed silhouette in the distance. Keep in mind it was practically pitch black at this time. Marvin swore that whatever was out there had to have some sort of source or controller. We all decided that night on August 29th, 2020, we would all go out to investigate. I am writing this in the bunker before we leave to investigate. The fog is the thickest we've ever seen it, and it's even worse because of the smoke. The current time right now is 10:30 p.m. Sunday, August 29th, 2020. If you don't see an update soon, assume the worst. Update. I'm updating this as a final message and a way for people to know what happened this night. I don't know how much time I have left. Last night at 11 p.m., August 29th, we all arrived at the bunker. Everyone had brought a weapon of some sort. Marvin brought a baseball bat, a few of us brought knives, and our friend Jeremiah, being the weeb he is, brought his sword. He bought on Amazon, and Josh had given a few of us BB guns. He said he didn't know how effective they would be, but at the very least it would slow them down. Our friend Tyler came last just as the fog started rolling in. He was out of breath, not wanting to be in the fog alone. As we sit there getting ready, both physically and mentally, I think to myself, if things go south, how will my parents know that I'm dead? Who will be there to tell our parents what happened during this night? Josh had finished putting metal BBs into each clip and handed a gun to me, Brandon, Nate, and Josh kept one with him. Keep in mind these BB guns were used with compressed air canisters, so they're loud and hurt if you get hit with it. We all split into teams of 2 and headed out. Noel and Avina stayed in the bunker to monitor the cams and keep in touch with us through walkie-talkies. The groups consisted of me and Marvin, Brandon and Jeremiah, Justin and Nate, Gabe and Jaden, and lastly, Josh and Tyler. As we all slowly climb out of the bunker, flashlight and weapons in hand, the chilling realization of what we are about to do starts to hit me and my heart races 1,000 beats a second. When we all climb out the bunker, we all notice how little we can see compared to the night it all happened first. Marvin and I walking in the direction of where he first encountered the creature. As I turn to my friends thinking this could be the last time I ever see them, I take my final look at them. I notice the sheer amount of fear in Brandon's eyes. I turn around to focus on walking and see that Marvin had the very same expression. I couldn't blame them. We were literally walking back into a nightmare. As me and Marvin walk, all we could hear was the sound of our footsteps in this claustrophobic fog. I jump a bit as I feel my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pull out my phone and see a text from Jaden saying that they got to the spot. A few minutes later, I get 3 more texts from the other 2 groups, saying they were in the spots they needed to be in. I look at Marvin and tell him that we should hurry up and get to the spot we needed to be. As we approach the location where Marvin first saw the creature, the fog seems as if it's compressed onto us even more. It could have just been me, but I could barely see a foot in front of us. When we got to the spot, something was abundantly clear from the start. It sounded like there were people whispering to me. I hastily pull out my phone to tell the others that we finally made it to the spot. After I told everyone we arrived, we all switched out walkie-talkies so we could hear Noel and Avina tell us if they saw things on the cams near us. If it wasn't clear already, we were here looking for signs of what we saw that night. We all split up into groups to go to the spots where we first saw the figures on the cams, and where they interacted with Brandon and Marvin. Noel and Avina were at the bunker because they both needed glasses, and if one of them tripped and fell, it would be bad for both people in their group. When Noel confirmed that everyone was in the right spots, we all basically roamed around looking for any signs of what we saw that night. As me and Marvin walked, I couldn't help but feel as if something was watching us from all directions. Then it happened. Marvin and I both started hearing voices. Because Marvin knew the dangers, and because of that he was able to resist it. Me, on the other hand, called out to the voice of my dead grandmother. According to Marvin, I said, "I'm sorry. If I could go back, I would do more. I'm sorry." Marvin asked what happened and why I called out to my grandma, and I told him that it was because I was hearing her voice call out to me. Marvin asked if something happened with me and my grandma. I told him that I blamed myself for her death. After I told him that, Marvin's face showed that he figured something out. He told me that when he heard voices, it was the sound of the kid he got paralyzed when he was younger in a playground accident in the 4th grade. He told me that the fog must prey on people's regrets. We were going to use the walkie-talkies to tell everyone what we just learned, but just as I put the walkie-talkie up to my mouth, Noel screams through the walkie-talkie, "Jaden, Gabe, behind you guys." As Noel says this, me and Marvin hear a shriek echo through the forest, and on the walkie-talkies, Gabe screamed, "No, no, no." Then the walkie-talkies cut off. Me and Marvin's face were filled with terror, as we could only imagine what could have happened. That only lasted for a second until Noel screamed, "Leo, Marvin, behind you guys." Marvin quickly makes a run for the bunker, and for some reason I pull out the BB gun and start firing at the creature. I watch as my bullet hits it, and lets out an ear-piercing cry. After this, I began to run behind Marvin. As we run, we hear on the walkie-talkies Nate calling out that they are near the bunker. As this happens, we can hear a clicking sound near them, and then through the walkie-talkie, we hear the BB gun go off. Then Nate and Justin let out a desperate scream and then get cut off. Me and Marvin begin to run faster. The only thing we can hear is our footsteps, our hearts racing faster and faster, and our breath struggling for air as we continue to run. As me and Marvin approach the bunker, we can see Jeremiah, Brandon, Josh, and Tyler running and approaching the bunker. As Noel opens the hatch, Avina comes out the bunker getting ready to help us get down. Jeremiah stops before he gets close to the bunker and uses his sword to stab the creature, following him and Brandon. The creature lets out a cry of pain and swipes Jeremiah to the side. With the monster slowed a tiny bit, Brandon turns to start shooting at the creature. With another cry of pain, the fog starts moving, wrapping around Brandon like a vacuum and sucking all the oxygen out of his lungs. I watch in absolute horror as I see Brandon fall on the floor, his body limp like a rag doll. Me and Marvin almost make it to the bunker when the fog starts wrapping around Marvin, and he's thrown far away from my field of vision. I continue running and watch as Josh gets thrown to a nearby tree, and when Tyler gets to the hatch, the fog grabs a hold of him and starts dragging him away. Avina tries to grab a hold of Tyler but is taken in the process. Noel holds the hatch open for me, and I jump in without thinking and break my leg in the process. As Noel tries to close the door, I hear him scream, and hear his body thud on what sounded like a tree. The hatch closes, but not fully so air is able to leak through. I've been sitting here for maybe an hour typing this out. The fog has been slowly filling up the room. To anyone who reads this, please never explore what lies within the fog. The current time is 5 a.m. My eyes are getting heavy. I hear my grandma whispering to me. I hear all my friends tell me they are fine and that I can sleep now. I hear a faint clicking noise and then fall asleep. I was 19 back when I was drafted to the war. I didn't believe in the war, but my country called for it. Gotta kill the commie bastards in Nam, some people said. I just finished high school and was living a good relaxing year with my girlfriend when the letter came. My parents called me into the living room with my girlfriend, Max. My father's old hands shook with the letter in them as he said, "Son, this is going to be hard to hear." He read out the message to me, and my mind zoned out when I heard about the draft. It felt horrible. I didn't believe in the war. The neighborhood also didn't. It was only a few months later when I got sent to Vietnam. We landed at a camp after a long flight in a plane and then a Huey. I grabbed my M16 and exited the Huey and set foot on my new home for the next year. It was horribly hot and wet. It was laborious to do anything, let alone train and do work constantly. We were fine for about 3 weeks. Until the first shot rang. I was outside base and was headed towards the perimeter to do my job when I heard a loud crack. I felt pain and heavy hearing pain in my right ear. I fell down off my ladder and put my hand on my right ear. Half of my ear was completely gone. I huddled in a corner with my rifle raised. After what felt like an eternity, my hearing came back a little, and I started to hear gunfire. Lots of gunfire. I looked up and saw ground breaking up and flying through the air in front of me as bullets ripped into the ground. I heard a few foreign words and more gunfire. One of the soldiers I hardly knew got his head blown off right in front of me. I heard a loud crunch and spurt and saw him fall over. His helmet covered his head from what I saw in the corner. I returned fire and dropped my magazine. As I was about to load another magazine in, I suddenly fell. Not in a hole or anything, but I couldn't find support in my leg. I lift myself up from one arm and my left leg and move over to cover and check my leg. There was a small hole in it with a much larger hole on the other side through the knee. As I lay on the ground against the corner, I start feeling the burn in my knee. As I watch the battle rage in front of me, I watch the lieutenant get shot in the shoulder. A pair of people walk up to him and shot 3 rounds in his back. They walk over to the unknown soldier and kick off his helmet. His head has a chunk missing on the top left and they shoot him as well. They see me laying against the wall and walk over to me slowly. One of them says something in a foreign language. This is the moment where I thought I was going to die. But a large orange flash and an extraordinary heat rose in the base in front of me. I watched the 2 soldiers get hit by large flames, and a large bang made my eardrums ring again. What happened after was a little confusing. I think I blacked out by the concussion, but it could have been anything. I wake up on the wall I was, and everything is blackened as well as the sky. I slowly get up and clutch my rifle. I have 4 magazines left in my vest, and a few magazines left for my 1911. I slowly drag myself across the base looking for any signs of life, but nothing. I knew I was alone at this point. I decided that my only option for survival was to wait and be weak for attack or enter the jungle. So I used a few sticks and wood strands to make a DIY leg brace, and I slowly limped off into the jungle. The temperature was a little cooler, but it was still very wet. After about 20 minutes of aimless wandering, I started to see lights fly over the tree line, and I faintly hear the noises of rotors cutting air above me. I can barely hear from the bomb detonation, but it's there. I walk on and off, sleep, and find plans to eat for about another 32 hours, and at that point, I can hear more clearly. The jungle is a very lonely place. The sun is either 3/4 or 1/4 through the sky when the noises first start. Helicopters start flying over, playing these horrific tapes of people speaking to the dead. I would later learn this to be Operation Wandering Soul. They would play these, and it was really haunting to hear the audio play. Then after, I began to hear more noises. screeching that would end abruptly, explosions when there was nothing to be seen, screaming, seeing people in the thick of the trees. The jungle messes with you, badly. At one point I found a village, completely untouched. No one was there, nothing was destroyed. It had a deep fog over it, but nothing was there. Another point I found a deep hole in the ground with a wooden panel over it. I entered the hole hoping to find anything, but it was just small rooms. Some had radio equipment, others had beds. I heard foreign words from the rooms and decided to hide in a dark corner of a bedroom. At this point it was day, so no one slept. After all the speaking ended, I stayed for an hour before swiftly leaving. I couldn't sleep for another 2 days. I swear I saw people wandering aimlessly in the forest. I swear something is stalking me. Around 1 day later, I found a squadron of US military tanks rolling into a small village and approached them. They instinctively raised their rifles at me, and I told them I was American. It consisted of a few people, a tank, and the tank crew. We were together until the tank rolled over a mine. The mine blew the tank open in the front, instantly killing all the crew, and one ground soldier got hit legs blown off by the bomb. Me and one other survived. We were together for a bit until one night we both fell asleep instead of one watching. I woke up and he was gone. I traveled farther into the mesmerizing jungle, silently calling his name and no response. I found him later hanging on a tree. Do you know what that isolation is like? You're alone in a hot, wet area, all alone. There's little sleep, nowhere to go, sounds that are inhuman to hear, and the chirping in the night. Remember when I said I felt like I was being stalked? I remember on day 3 after the landmine detonation, after drinking dirty water and eating shit for food, I went insane. I saw things moving in the dark, bushes shaking, footsteps pounding, and eyes in the dark looking at me. They replayed the same voices from the speakers about the ghosts. Other soldiers who experienced this called them voices in the dark. Some of the more insane ones claimed to have seen the voices, and what they come from, screaming at them too with their lungs. No man should ever have the pain of seeing it, over and over. I was rescued 1 day after when I stumbled back into the charred camp I came from. I don't even know how I went in a giant circle, but a cleanup crew landed in their Hueys and found me. But there's one thing I still think about. Was there something watching me out there?